This is Ralph Rentler, director of the Smithsonian Bicentennial Folklife Festival. If you enjoyed the festival, you'll be interested in this invitation.
Try to change it, I can't take the nights without you.
Ladies and gentlemen, an opportunity like this cannot be taken for granted.
This evening, we are going to be beating our hearts out for you all, so I want to see people enjoying themselves. So get up and feel the music and do something about it, okay?
This event is a right of cultural democracy.
Many partners, you included. I encourage you to stand alongside with us.
Transformed. They have captured the histories of this country, both in terms of the artifacts that have shaped it, the dialogue and the discourse and the knowledge that is within it. We are joined here today, firstly, by Dr. Ahmed Khouri, who for 4 decades has been collecting artifacts that really chart the history of the United Arab Emirates. 6,000 artifacts, I hear. A significant part of his historical collection reflects the history of the Arabian Gulf in terms of its pearl diving, its culture, its traditions, and its postage stamps. And between Dr. Ahmed and myself on this big screen are 2 very favourite friends of the United Arab Emirates, Dr. Frauke Hurd Bey and David Hurd, CBE.
I think they need a platform.
Dr. Frauke is a historian, political scientist. She has been a witness to the growth of the UAE over the 5 decades. She was integral to the development of the National Archives of the UAE, and she has written many books and many academic articles on both the social, economic, and constitutional history of the country. In 2007, she was awarded the Abu Dhabi Award by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan. David Hurd, CBE, has spent 59 years in the United Arab Emirates, so next year there will be a big cake for him, I'm sure. Since 1963, he first arrived in the UAE and created some of the first oil wells in the desert. He has witnessed the establishment of the federal state, and together with his wife, he has enjoyed the friendship of many of its citizens and of its leaders. He is the author of the seminal publication, From Pearls to Oil, How the Oil Industry Came to the UAE. So we're in for a great chat today, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, let me start with the very simple question. How has the UAE changed? If you could summarize it in just a few key words, what are the major shifts that you have witnessed in the UAE during the time that you've been here? Dr. Ahmed Khouri, what are the seminal points that you feel mark the shifting sands of the UAE?
Good afternoon, first of all, and good afternoon to Dr. Faraka. Evening, I think, there in Abu Dhabi, and David, who I know them for 55 years plus. They are very old colleagues, to be honest, and David used to work for ADNOC onshore. UAE has changed beyond recognition. It's very difficult to say, educationally, socially. It's completely different than what I remember in the mid-1950s and late 1950s. UAE, I mean, I could say Abu Dhabi was a very small village, or a small town, I could say, but not a city those days. Dubai, the same. Sharjah was a bit, you could say it was a city, and the rest of the Emirate. But the changes have taken all through the UAE. I'll come to some more afterwards.
David and Frauke, I mean, David, I understand from Ahmed that he first met you when he was 14 years old. Over the last 50, 60 years, what would you see would be the highlights in the transformation of the UAE?
Well, I think there are many highlights, and there are many things that are unchanged. And I think one can start too with one or two of the things that are unchanged.
Lovely.
And one is the hospitality, the generosity of people that I've come across. They are a pleasure to sit with, to chat with. And perhaps I would like to tell you a little story about one experience of mine many, many years ago. And it could happen again today, except it couldn't, because everything has changed. And that is, I was in the way south of Abu Dhabi, down south of the Liwa dunes, the Liwa oases, very high dunes there. We were working on a well down there. And the journey back to the coast, to my base, was 4 hours. And I was setting out on this journey, thinking of the next 4 hours, grinding in second and third gear through the sand with the heat, no air conditioning in our Land Rovers. The heat was blasting through the front of the car. And I came into a small settlement, you could not call it much more than that, with a few date palms. And all of a sudden, I saw a lady motioning to me to stop. And I didn't see any habitation in the area, just date palms. And she motioned to me to stop. So I stopped, and she invited me to have a coffee with her. And so we sat under the date palm. And she motioned that the water for the coffee came from her well nearby. And I didn't see anyone else at all. And my Arabic was, of course, pretty miserable in those days. This was 1966. And the generosity, the kindness that she should motion to a complete stranger, such as me, to stop and have coffee. So I will bear this in mind forever and ever. And it is typical of the generosity that we have enjoyed over the years. That has not changed. Of course, the thing is now, if I went down there, there is a wonderful broad asphalted road going right the way through the neighboring village to that settlement, which is now I would say a village, if not a small township, and the evidence of oil, gas activity all around you. It's just changed completely, and it's wonderful the way it has happened, because the local people have benefited so much from this in a way which we never ever dreamt of 50, 60 years ago, that it would be so wonderfully developed. Abu Dhabi, the Emirates, with education facilities, health facilities, and you look across to one of the islands now off the coast of Abu Dhabi with a wonderful bridge across. I'm not talking about Saadiyat Island that everyone talks about, but it's Hudayriyat Island to the west, where there are wonderful facilities for people to go across and enjoy an evening, a snack, a cup of coffee, and a children's playground, and so on, or the beach, or whatever. So I think I've said enough for the moment.
Frauke, over to you.
Well, what can I add? I mean, I've seen, and we have together, experienced all this. I would want to say that what has changed really over the years, what one could observe, was particularly the impact of education. And first of all, to have an impact, you have to have really good education. And also you have to have a society which then puts a lot of store into educated people, gives them chances. And that is something that I think one can see in particular, that this has changed since I first came to attend sort of the end of year events in the girls' schools, for instance, in Abu Dhabi, and what a difference education has made to society in general, beginning with the fact that you have so many highly educated ladies, and so many of them are so keen to continue their education because it is in their society, it is being more and more appreciated. While in the past, the family was very wary of the change that the educated woman might bring into the family life. But that has all changed, and the positive impact of education is what I would rate as one of the very important things that I've seen as change, and one could elaborate on that.
I think it's very important that, it is wherever humanity exists, survives and thrives in the world, it comes down to the same values: education, health, the family unit, a safe and strong society and a prosperous one. But when you all three of you, when you first moved to the UAE, I'd love to know, I'm curious, why you moved to the UAE in the first place. And what did you find back then? Because this was almost the pre-oil era. Many people around the world assume that the United Arab Emirates was always wealthy, but that wasn't the case, was it?
No, it wasn't. I think I will go back to what David and Dr. Farrow said. A lot of things have changed, but culturally we have not really changed much. The generosity of the people are still there. I was born in 1952 in a simple 2-room palm tree fronts. We had no running water, no almost anything. Life was very, very difficult, but things have changed with the income of the oil revenue. But I say the most important, the wise leadership, because many countries have oil. We have used it to the most for the benefit of the people. There are almost free hospitals, free education. Life has changed, and I think David and Farrow could add more to this. I think from mid-1960s, things changed tremendously. That's where the oil revenue started to circulate through the country. But again, as I say it again, it was the wise leadership of the UAE as a whole. They didn't waste the money. They developed the country and developed the people.
Very well said, very well said. Frauke and David, please, why did you choose the UAE as your home and to raise your family? And what was it like when you first stepped foot in Abu Dhabi?
Well, I didn't really choose to raise a family here or even make my home here. I had just finished at university and I was looking for some sort of more adventuresome occupation and outside Britain. So I applied to various places, but the most interesting one and the best well-rewarded one was an offer to come to the Middle East, to the Trucial States is what it said on my visa, issued by the Foreign Office on behalf of the rulers of the Trucial States, which was a complete mystery to me. I'd heard of Oman because of the problems there and British military officers there, but the Trucial States meant nothing. So when I finally got onto that Comet 4 jet aircraft at Heathrow, and the Comet 4 was an interesting aircraft, but we'll leave that for another day. And I got to Bahrain, and as they opened the door around about midnight of the aircraft, we were all hit by this hot, damp, smelly air, a smell that was very peculiar and very peculiar to that situation. Anyway, I spent a day or two in Bahrain to organize things and then got on a DC-3 aircraft, which only managed to get to Jebel Dana in the west of Abu Dhabi It was supposed to go on to our camp in Tarif, but it didn't. It couldn't. It had to go back. Had mechanical problems, and 3 of us were left standing on the dirt with nothing but a windsock and a distant view of hills one way and sand dunes another way. And that was my welcome to Abu Dhabi. But of course, things did get better. Someone came along when it got really hot in a Land Rover and took us on a bumpy track for the next couple of hours to the base in Tarif. And of course, it was quite warm, but I was young and we enjoyed these things. The passport in my back pocket was becoming soaking wet with the perspiration, but never mind. Got to Tarif and I was just sort of open-eyed and ready for anything. So when they showed me a small caravan to live in, it also smelt like the aircraft had smelt of onions and kerosene. The caravan smelt of something else. Anyway, it was a caravan that had worked its way around the desert for many, many years and had come to its final resting place on its 2 little wheels. And that was where I was put. And it was fine. Maybe today I would balk at that sort of thing, but I was young and looking for some sort of adventures, which, of course, were many in the oil industry. And I could tell you so many things that we enjoyed over the years. But I really came to a place that I knew nothing about. I didn't know that the company I was working for had operated throughout the Middle East. I didn't know that it had operated throughout the Emirates. I learned all of this much later. And that the British political officer and the political agent in Abu Dhabi were watching over us all the time. And there was a constant, let's say, I wouldn't say it was ever a tug of war, but a tug of influences, perhaps. And we certainly minded our own business. Anyway, Frauke.
Well, I didn't come particularly to search adventure. No, I came because my husband had already spent 4 years in Abu Dhabi. We got married in September 1967, and I had just got my PhD at the university in Berlin in September 1967. So I needed just a little time to pack my books and get everything sorted. Get, for instance, my from David organized my non-objection certificate from the British government on behalf of the ruler of Abu Dhabi.
Wow.
And that was waiting for me at the airport in Bahrain, I suppose. And I went where, I got married and my husband was working in Abu Dhabi. And we actually had known each other for 8 years before we got married because we both had other things to do. We had to go to university and so on and prepare for life. So when I arrived in Abu Dhabi via Bahrain also and via this little aircraft, this smelly little aircraft, but it didn't break down. It broke. David came to meet me in Bahrain, and then we got to Abu Dhabi in this little aircraft and were whisked by the company courier with a car to our house. And it wasn't a tent. We didn't live in a tent, not even in a caravan. We lived from then on for many years in one of the 36 company bungalows. And for me as a student, just having finished being sort of 7 years in digs and so on, I thought this living with my husband in our own house, a bungalow which was very well appointed, there was water and electricity was available. And I thought this was really wonderful. And I did have some problems, yes. I was the only, within the group of company wives or company families, I was the only non-British person. There was one lady who was originally Greek, but she had lived there for many, many years. And I think I've also by now become British, but at that point it wasn't the case. And I learned English, and I had even studied English at university along with history and so on, but I found it rather difficult to listen to when the air conditioning was going and so on, when ladies were talking about things that I didn't have much interest in because we didn't have children, and they talked in either, Irish or Scottish or whatever. I found it very difficult to begin with to be slightly an outsider, but we launched into learning Arabic immediately. Didn't get very far because there was no textbook to learn Arabic, written Arabic at all. We didn't get hold of anything that was prepared for foreigners to learn Arabic. Of course, the children in town did go to school and were taught by mostly Egyptian teachers and did learn the language, but they spoke it also. So anyway, it was an uphill struggle. I also had to spend some time editing my PhD thesis because it was published and then sent back to Germany and so on. So I was well occupied, and I was to begin with very well occupied, but then many political things happened which interested me very much. And I could see that the society, which I observed, was going to change very, very fast, because I realized the income from oil for the government was going to increase substantially. And we could see how the rows and rows of low-cost houses were being rolled out, I could say, because they were all identical, and there were, groups of 50 and 70 and 100 being built up over the next few months. And one could see that this tribal society, which was so far living all within their sort of tribal interests, had to somehow cope with a changing environment and a changing political environment as well, because it had been announced that Britain would renounce its, withdraw its umbrella, I think is a good word, from the Gulf, and so many things would change. So I wanted to, first of all, find out where they changed from. I was very interested in finding out really what the basis of what is a tribe, what is Islam, how did people live, what was the environment. And as far as the environment was concerned, I was very, very lucky that 3 weeks after I arrived, we had an opportunity to travel around with some friends in a Land Rover, one of those really old type Land Rovers, no air conditioning, no electric windows and so on, just very old type. And in these Land Rovers, we at New Year's time of 67 to 68, we traveled through all the 7 crucial states. And that was such a fantastic chance to see what this world was like into which we were thrown. And in hindsight, I'm very grateful that I had this opportunity and I could build on this experience. And I could tell you a lot of what it all looked like, but that's maybe we come to it in more detailed questions. But
we
the fact
will.
that we had this chance to see all the Emirates and how people lived there, and then oftentimes go back and back again and see the changes, was really a wonderful chance to build an understanding of the society and changes.
And also, I think that, thank you so much, Frauke. We could listen to you all for the rest of the festival, I think. But maybe because you saw transformation coming, you saw those houses being built, you saw those roads being tarmacked, that the three of you, in your own individual ways, decided to become guardians of history in such a way. Dr. Ahmed, what prompted you to start collecting? Was it because you saw time running away with itself?
Yeah, okay. No, I think I will try to say something more about myself. In 1957, before 1958, we didn't have a formal schooling in Abu Dhabi. The first school was built by the British and was given as a present to the people of the Abu Dhabi people. I joined the religious schooling in 1957, and then I joined the government school or the formal school in 1958. I studied till 1963, but life was hard, so I started working with my uncle as an assistant technician. In 1967, I joined ADNOC Offshore Training Center. At the end of
That's the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company,
yes,
correct?
Yeah, it was called different names, but ADNOC Offshore, onshore we call it. In 1960, at the end of 1967, the late Sheikh Zayed visited us. There were only 20 of us in the whole school or in the training center, and he shook hands with everyone and he talked with every one of us. When he came to me, he realized that Al-Khoury family, they were mainly business people, and he said, I want you to study. There is a lot of time for business in the future. To be honest, the way he said it, it went into my head. I worked very hard, and in 1972, the company sent me to UK for higher education. I spent there almost 12 years, getting 4 degrees, a BSc in electrical, a master in mathematics, and then an MBA and a doctorate. I visited many museums, and I talked to the people, and I realized we have history. UAE as a country with the 7 Emirates is 50 years old, but UAE history go back to 130,000 years ago, when the first human left Africa to Yemen, to Oman, to UAE, and then to Asia. The actual history with civilization started some 10,000 years ago. And unbelievably, we didn't hear this in the 1960s, that we have a long history of some 10,000 years in some of the islands in Abu Dhabi and in the rest of the Emirate. So when I came back in 1973 I came back, but I didn't really go around. In 1974, I didn't come back. I went to France to learn French language. But in 1975, I came back and I visited some of the Emirates. I had some money, so I started buying. And then I asked my colleagues, my father, my uncles, that if they see something good, buy it for me. I gave them even some money beforehand. So thus it started, because if we don't collect and don't write about them, the history could get easily lost. And I think I have written already a book which has to be published soon. I called it Memoir of an Emirati Boy. So I'm saying that from the age of 6 to say till now, and I think I will include this festival in this book and then publish it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Khoury. Frauke, you were very integral as a historian, setting up what became the National Archives of the UAE. Tell us about those early days and why you chose to contribute to the historical preservation of the country.
Well, I didn't set up the Center for Documentation. It was set up, it was an idea by the person who was at the time the Rais Diwan. He was Sheikh Zayed's, in the court, he was Sheikh Zayed's right-hand man. And it was realized that after the British declaration that they would withdraw from the Gulf at the end of 1971, it was realized that there were some sort of political and geographical and loose ends to be tied up, i.e. that there were claims to some of the territory of Abu Dhabi and the other Emirates, or the other crucial states. And it was realized that there was no good saying our people have dug these wells and they've always been there, and ask them, they know that they've been there. What you need is written evidence of ownership or claim. And so the center was set up, and the Dr. Mohammed Morsi Abdullah, an Egyptian historian, was asked to head it, and he headed it for 30 years. And the idea was to collect everything that was evidence of the history and of all the crucial states, but also to begin with an emphasis on Abu Dhabi. And where does one get this from? Well, if one digs further into UAE, into Gulf history, one realizes that the Gulf was influenced enormously by the fact that the British government of India, when it was the East India Company to start with, and later the part of the Indian Empire, the Gulf was very much influenced by India, and that this influence bore evidence in huge amounts of written material, meticulously acribic material collections. And this collection then, when Pakistan became independent in 1947, this entire material, a complete but finite archive of the British evidence in India, was transported to London, and it's called the Indian Archive, the Indian Archive, and it's now in London in an archive, and it can be consulted. And that is what we started. Consult this sort of very, very useful fund of information. But one also realized that one did not want to be beholden to the observant and to the ideas and I might even say the ideology of one particular group of people who had written about this area. So very soon, the center, we branched out and just tried to get everything about the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula from any of the archives of other nations' archives. French, Russian, German, the Vatican, Portuguese, Dutch. These were very prolific, Portuguese and Dutch, very prolific, very helpful. And all of this was collected, and the place where it was collected was the old fort. Now, it all started in one room where Dr. Morsi and two of his assistants had already collected. Dr. Morsi had been to Cairo and to Beirut to buy any books that he could find about the Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, and initiated getting journals from reprints and so on from journals about this area. And that was what attracted me, that I wanted to, in the first instance, just myself, possibly write something about what I was seeing and what was happening and all these changes. And so I went there, first of all, for my own information and for use of the material that was already there. But sooner or later, of course, I got roped in, and I joined a group, and we were 4 people for quite a long time until they expanded And I can say now that over exactly the 30 years the center was in the old fort, at the very end of it, in June of 1998, the Center for Documentation had used the entire old fort, which is a fort that had been sort of like a four-corner fort, and then had been built around by a palace by Sheikh Shahood in the late 30s, early 40s. So it was a very big place. And we had also set up things as an exhibition, various exhibitions. And so the center had graduated from one room to a hub of information possibilities next to the Cultural Foundation, which had been built again in the center of town, right next to the old fort. And the Cultural Foundation, in turn, was the place where everybody could go to a library, could go even to girls for ballet lessons. There were
absolutely.
There was music. There was absolutely everything cultural going on, exhibitions and events and cinema weeks and whatever.
Let me just stop you there, Frauke.
The whole place became a cultural center.
Okay, let me just stop you there. Thank you. Sorry, time is running out. We only have a few more minutes. But I wanted to just highlight that old fort that Dr. Frauke is talking about and the Cultural Foundation still stands today. In fact, they were both recently renovated and they very much are the historical heart of Abu Dhabi. As we sort of look at wrapping up, I want to just ask you, in terms of going back to those human values, going back to those friendships that you've developed over the years with yourself, Frauke and David, the citizens and the leaders of the UAE, and yourself, Dr. Ahmed, with all the transformations that are happening within the heritage sector of the United Arab Emirates. How do your friends react to your work within heritage? How do visitors to your exhibition, Dr. Ahmed, how do readers of your books, David and Frauke, react to the transformation of the UAE? Have you ever had any weird and wonderful questions? Any interesting stories arising from this discourse?
Of course.
Ahmed.
Well, I started really, the real collection started in 1977. At that time, I would say there was not much interest because it was plentiful around and people were changing and they went to modern furniture, modern artifacts and the rest of it. But since 1990s, I think they have realized that it is their heritage and things have really changed. Okay. But in the past 10 years now, they have realized completely that they have to look after it. There is not much artifacts around for sale. And they said, oh, it belongs to my family, it belongs to my grandmother, my grandfather, and I want to keep it. What I will do with the money.
There is a historical value. Yes. They appreciate the pricelessness of what they have.
I think they do. Even here, most locals who are with me, they come and say, oh, I think my grandmother used to wear this. I don't know what happened to it now. We don't have it. So there is something that they say they have to get something like that to keep it in the family, to remind.
Nice, important. And to hand it down to the next generations as well.
It's surely it will be, but it will be less per individual.
Absolutely.
It will be less for individual.
David and Frauke, I mean, you've written so many books between you. You are vessels of the history of the UAE. Any interesting discussions that have arisen from all the wonderful work you've done?
Yes, of course. I would say the first book that I wrote about the UAE was published from Trucial States, United Arab Emirates, was published in 1982, and it really didn't hit the UAE at all. And I also realized I wanted to write it for colleagues in university circles, and was very happy to get reviews, good reviews from that quarter. But when it was republished in 2004 or something in Dubai, it also then translated into Arabic and French and German, but that meant that suddenly people realized that there was a handbook, so to speak, where they could pick and choose and find what they were interested in. And so it was very often also students and people who were obliged to write something themselves found our books very helpful. But that's not the only thing. It really meant that there was so much gratitude that we spent so much time doing all this. And now that we are retired, continue to write and also talk to people who come and ask, because they suddenly realize the authors are still in town. And rather than go on cruises, that's what we do. And that is, I think, very much appreciated. We love it when people tell us that.
We're glad you don't go on cruises, Frauke. David, your discussions over the years must have generated so many good discussions with people about the role of oil, how oil has contributed to the progression of the country. I want to ask you personally, where were you in 1971 when the Act of Union was signed? Do you remember that day?
Of course I remember it very well indeed. 1971, we were told by the British authorities, who were then converting themselves from political agent to ambassador, we were told that we as a British community should we should lie low. We shouldn't go out very much. We should just keep quietly to ourselves. So what happened was that Frauke went off to Yemen, and I climbed Jebel Hafid, which I thought was about right.
Which Jebel Hafid is the second highest mountain in the United Arab Emirates, so not bad.
Well, we have our own way of lying low, but it was a great day, and it was, I think, one of the most important things that has happened is that the UAE, established then, was hardly known around the world, and you look at it today, where it is recognized as being in the leadership in so many things, where it is known in so many circles for its generosity and its attempts to keep peace in the area. And it is a transformation that we never, ever even dreamt of. It's wonderful, really wonderful. And I could go on and go through the various stages, but we don't have time for that. All I will say is that we are very grateful to be still living in Abu Dhabi, and we will continue to write.
Gentlemen, let's give them all a great round of applause. Please visit Dr. Ahmed Khouri's booth, where you can see some beautiful artifacts from the 50 years of the UAE and before. And Dr. Khouri has got so many stories about his life. He is a living witness to the growth of the UAE. So please visit him. His booth is just over here by the side. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.